You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast, brought to you by MartinClinic.com. During the episode, the doctors share a lot of information. As awesome as the info may be, it is not intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent any disease. It's strictly for informational purposes.
Well, good morning, everyone. And we're going to continue today on the adrenal glands. And adrenal glands are two little glands, chestnut-shaped on top of your kidneys. We're going to talk about adrenal exhaustion. We started yesterday. We talked about reverse engineering on chronic fatigue syndrome, now called, they don't call it so much that anymore. You don't hear that very much like we used to. Okay, so we're going to talk about adrenal exhaustion. Remember, so let's talk about adrenal exhaustion. Okay, so how does that happen? First of all, we talked about it. Reverse engineering. We sent out, this is in early 90s, I think, 500 case study. We send out questionnaires. Anybody that volunteered that was diagnosed with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia in the days. I don't separate the two of them, by the way. They both come from the adrenal gland. But what happened is that when the questionnaires came back, and I'm a big guy, as you know, if you come to my office, you come to see me, first thing you do is you fill out a questionnaire. And that's important to me because lab work is important. I don't negate that, of course. But functional medicine is looking at lab and your particular history. Everybody's an individual and everybody's different, but questions. My dad taught me that. Ask your patients questions. They have inside information. So I'm always, and that helps me to reverse engineer. For example, I just couldn't get over chronic fatigue syndrome, how it was a phenomenon in the 80s and the 90s. And, every second woman, it seemed, developed this condition, and mostly women. And I was why? Why today? And one of the big factors, and this came back under 500 questionnaires. We analyzed the questionnaire, the answers, and antibiotics. The greatest discovery of the 20th century was becoming the curse of the 21st. And I'm not against antibiotics. You guys know me. If you need antibiotics, they can save your life. It's more that it's an issue of it destroys your microbiome, the bacteria in your gut. And I was talking about that way back then, as we discussed yesterday. Now, the other thing is stress, cortisol. These women were under stress. Family, finances, relationships, trauma, like a car accident. Never fully recovered. What happens? And then I just want to go through this morning. What continued to happen? So yesterday we talked about this book written in 1999, and I'm reading from page 147 of this book. Somebody asked yesterday, by the way, is this book still available? Nope. Well, it's no longer in circulation. And I wrote another book that was very similar, Energy Robbers and the Fatigue Cure. That was a follow-up to this book on chronic fatigue. This one was called The Steps to Fight Chronic Fatigue Syndrome for the Modern Woman. Okay? And this one was a very, very, very popular book at the time. I actually published it in French under Québécois, which is a big publisher in the province of Quebec, and La Syndrome de la Fatigue Chronique et Fibromyalgie. That's what it was called, and it was very popular in Quebec. We actually had to, they did 2 runs of it. So it was very popular because people were getting this and they didn't know why. And we were, even in those days, I did a lot of radio shows and TV shows across the United States and Canada with these books. And I was probably interviewed 500 times. It became a big seller in Canada and somewhat in the United States at the time because of its popularity. And so we talked about what was happening, and I brought it in. I was the first guy, because they were calling chronic fatigue syndrome the Epstein-Barr virus, or the yuppie flu. That's what it was called. And I said, no, well, the virus maybe, but it wasn't the cause. I was talking about the adrenal glands. And, in medicine, and even today, I don't want to be negative, but in medicine, they don't even look at the adrenal glands unless they think you have Cushing's or Addison's disease. They don't look at those little chestnut-shaped, you got two of them. And remember yesterday, we were talking about the fight or flight. Well, the fight or flight is meant to be temporary. It's not meant to go on for a long period of time. And if it does, it'll exhaust you. So obviously, the number one symptom is exhaustion. It's not fatigue. People think, well, you know what? I'm tired too, doc. This is exhaustion. This is different. This is not... I'm tired because I had a long weekend. I can tell you, I was tired. I drove back from Florida, 17 hours the first day. We went from the south of Florida up into West Virginia. I was exhausted, but I was tired. But 1 or 2 good nights sleep, and I was back. So that's not real exhaustion. I felt exhausted, but it didn't last. Adrenal exhaustion just lasts and lasts and lasts. So I'm always big on checking people's cortisol, their levels of cortisol, because that's the way you check the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands have a lot to do with your other glands. So when I was reverse engineering these things back in the late 80s and the 90s, I was finding that the thyroid was affected. The pineal gland was affected. I'll talk about that in a second. And the hypothalamus up in the brain. If you want to cut to the quick about your brain, there's 2 centers in your brain that you have to think about. One is your hypothalamus, and that controls all your hormones. Okay? And then you have the hippocampus. Think of campus. Think of your memory. That's your hippocampus. So the 2 centers of the brain in adrenal exhaustion were affected. One was the hypothalamus, and now your thyroid. Your thyroid. Now, we talked about this. You can get this teaching online with us at martinclinic.com. If you want, get the teaching on thyroid distress syndrome. Because this is very important, because your thyroid is your gas pedal in your car. It's the orchestra leader. It really isn't, but it's like a puppet. I call it the orchestra leader because it's actually coming from the hypothalamus, but for the sake of discussion, the thyroid is so important, and it's so hard to test. It's almost impossible to test the thyroid properly because it's connected to everything else. And unless you look at this holistically, look at everything else, this is why it's so hard to diagnose, because people fall through the cracks. You get your your TSH done, and the doc goes, oh, your thyroid's normal. No, it's not. Not if you have symptoms of thyroid. You're always tired, fatigued, weight gain, hair loss. Look at your hair. You're losing hair, ladies. Men, I used to have a lot of hair, honest to God. But men, we lose hair. It's almost normal for a man to lose hair, but it's not normal for women to lose hair. and your hair thins out, that's thyroid. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. So the thyroid has a big responsibility even with adrenals, because if you have high levels of cortisol over a period of time, then you're not going to be able to convert. What cortisol does, it stops the conversion of T4. Okay, let me just go back a little bit on your thyroid. For your thyroid to work at 100%, you need T4 to be converted to T3. Now, if you want to see some teaching on that, go on our website. You make a tablespoon, not even, I think it's even a teaspoon, of the whole year, you make a teaspoon of T3. Your thyroid is so sensitive that if you're not making enough T3, so all your thyroid hormones, T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, need to be converted to T3. T4 gets converted to T3 so that it works properly. It's so sensitive. And if your cortisol, if you're under stress because of a poor diet and relationships or family dynamics, or, your kid is on drugs or depression, or, you know what I mean? Mama, who worries the most in your family? You. Cortisol. Well, what cortisol does, it doesn't allow the conversion of T4 to T3. So what happens? Your thyroid doesn't work properly. And now you're fatigued. You get a fatigue. You get weight gain. Oh, Dr. Martin, I can't lose weight. Yeah, and you're a woman. And a lot of times it's because of your cortisol. That's not allowing your thyroid to work properly, guys. This is what happens. I look at patients holistically. I want to see everything. Why? Because they fall through the cracks in modern medicine, because medicine doesn't take into, they just look at the lab work. They're not doing your T3s. They're just doing your TSH or whatever, and you can't find it. They're not checking your cortisol levels. And you can become exhausted. And mama, I get you. I understand it. Your husband goes to bed, he falls asleep in 5 seconds, and your brain doesn't want to turn off. That's cortisol. And that is eventually going to affect your thyroid. You gain weight, your hair changes. Even sometimes your voice changes because your thyroid, it's inflamed. It's not working properly. And you can get mood swings and muscle pain and itchiness. Now, remember I was telling you about my beard? It's itchy. I'm always scratching. But that's not my thyroid. But ladies, you get an unexplained itch. Often can be your thyroid. It's not that it's diseased, it's just that it's not working at its highest level. You get it? And one of the main reasons is because of your adrenals. I know that's up in the brain because your adrenals don't do anything without your hypothalamus telling it what to do. And so you see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? This is what functional medicine is supposed to do. You look at the whole picture. I'm a reverse engineer guy. Like if you come in and you're exhausted, I want to know why. There's a reason for it. It's not, it's stress. Yeah, but why? What does stress do? Well, it doesn't allow your thyroid to work properly. So we call that thyroid distress syndrome. And look, the adrenals are really important. You can think about that, how important, and some of the major signs of adrenal. Well, I'll tell you. Let me just give you some signs of adrenal. Page 147 of this book. I've had this book on my bookshelf for 20 years. I saved one because they're no longer in print. But I sort of forgot. that come on. I'm writing new books all the time. And this one, but it says, okay, I'm just going to go over this with you. Adrenal gland, exhaustion. Here's some other things that it might do to you. Hypoglycemia. It'll play with your blood sugar. And the worst thing you can do when you have hypoglycemia is to eat sugar. You want to eat sugar because you want to elevate your blood sugar. It's the worst thing you can do. I know people that get low blood sugar, they have an orange juice. That's the worst thing you can do. Have steak, have eggs, have cheese. This is why I always come back to that. I'll talk to you tomorrow about a negative study on the keto diet. I've been talking keto so long, way before keto was ever popular. And, I'm not so much a keto guy as I modify that. There's a reason for it. I'll discuss that with you tomorrow. Hypoglycemia. When you're exhausted, you can get low blood pressure. I'm not just talking fatigue. I'm talking exhaustion. Hypoglycemia, fluctuations in your blood sugar. Loss of appetite. You lose an appetite, or cravings for sugar or salt. A lot of times you go by Laura Secords and you want to do a swan dive. That can be your adrenal glands.
You've reached the end of another Doctor is In podcast with your hosts, Dr. Martin Jr. and Sr. Be sure to catch our next episode, and thanks for listening.